And you're continuously giving yourself something to focus on, as opposed to, I just know how to move around these few shapes, so. And that's why you make mistakes, because where should I pause? Where should I go next? And that's an important skill to build. If you're going to spend any of your time noodling, which most of us probably do, you should be using it as an opportunity to truly improve your guitar playing skills, especially in the realms of improvisation and guitar soloing. Now, a big reason why so many online guitar teachers tell people to stop noodling is that the traditional approach to noodling around on the guitar is just locking into the same few shapes you already know, locking into the same handful of licks that you already know, so it ends up sounding, fragmented and choppy. It doesn't actually improve or enhance your skills. So all of a sudden, you go into a guitar store and there's somebody, right? Which, at certain points in our guitar playing careers can be really encouraging and fun to hear yourself create something and recognize that you're getting better in your skill building in a certain in one way. But anyone who can do that can actually sound 10 times better if they just start to noodle with a purpose. All right, so that's the concept for the day, is noodling with a purpose. And I'll show you how to do this in 3 really simple steps, basically 3 concepts, and how you can practice this and incorporate it into a session that's a lot of fun, because it enhances your creativity, but will also make you a better guitar player and make you more capable when you get into, jamming scenarios where there's a little more pressure, or even more pressure where you're playing in front of people and you want to lay down a good solo. This is a great way to experiment with that. All right. So step 1, or concept 1, is choosing a target note when you're playing around. So I'm gonna be playing in a really simple A minor pentatonic, right? The most basic shape. And I'm gonna be using, an A note as the target. It's an A minor pentatonic. So here's an A, here's an A, here's an A, here's an A. If you don't know how to, locate all of the notes, you're still kind of figuring out the neck, that's all right. You can stay in that shape and just kind of target one A note. If you want a little practice routine to locate all the notes on the neck, I've got a nice one right here. But let's just keep it in that shape, show you how simple it can be. So I'm landing on that A. Taking a breath is really important, right? And not feeling like you need to keep going and keep going and keep going. Take a pause, and you can repeat. So, I changed it up slightly. I can bring in some new notes. And, you might have the inclination to go somewhere else, but for right now, you're using this as a way to skill build and say, no, I'm just gonna go to A, all right? And if you think about putting it into a context, like a blues context, all right, I'm gonna put some chords behind it. It would work. Right? It might not be the most flavorful thing ever, but it would work. So already you're bringing things from, from this cyclical kind of manic, chaotic, same thing over and over to refining, all right, well, I'm using similar phrases, but I'm building on them. I'm experimenting, but I'm doing it in a meaningful way, and I'm just choosing a target note. Now, for this concept, you can set a 5-minute timer, all right? And you can put on any old backing track and play around in that key. If you only know the, this simple minor pentatonic shape, use it. If you know a few more shapes and you can move around the neck, make other A notes your target, right? There's a different A note. Lovely. If you don't know how to do that, you don't know how to map the neck with pentatonics, I've got a video on that I think is very helpful. But, just finding that note and making it your target. Inside of those 5 minutes, maybe you do that, for 5 reps, right? I find the A note for 5 different licks or phrases. Well, then I can say, all right, what are the notes in that pentatonic shape, right? A, C, D, E, and G. So let's just choose C. You can be kind of random with it. So now I'm choosing C. And notice I'm still using similar licks. That's fine. And just lingering on that C. And excuse the guitar faces if I'm, making too many as I'm going through this. But you can choose a different target note inside of those 5 minutes, right? So you set up a backing track, put on a timer, and you're gonna use this concept, first. You don't have to put on a backing track, right? You can just play around, no backing track, no pressure, and just play around with some licks, Okay, there's C, right? It can be, a gradual thing. You don't have to be an expert here. It can just be a few notes. Right, so if you're newer, you can still play around with this. And again, it might not sound the way you want to sound eventually, but you're chipping away at the skill of creating something on your own and being very intentional about it, all right? And I think that's just important stuff. All right, now, concept 2, right? So once you're done with those 5 minutes, you could, again, turn this into a practice session. You can go much longer, right? I know it can be fun to experiment and things like that. So if you want to do 10 minutes per concept, that's fine. Concept 2 would be confining yourself to a specific pattern or shape or string set somewhere on the neck based on your preferences or your weaknesses. All right, so just to kind of stay in the blues realm, if I'm going minor pentatonic, I would call this like the Buddy Guy box because it's minor. If you scooch it up, it would be the B.B. King box, but let's not focus too much on that. It would be these notes right here. And I'm just staying inside of this little 5-note box and just seeing what I can make with it. And it's gonna have to, it's gonna force you to be creative. So maybe I'll linger on some bends. And play around with repetition, lingering here, lingering there, staying within 2 notes or 3 notes inside of the 5-note shape. But, similar to concept 1, we're just creating these frameworks and confines to stay in, to force us to be more intentional and ultimately be a bit more creative. And this is a huge thing, when you're listening to your favorite guitar players, it sounds intentional because for the most part, it's intentional. All right, I'm gonna pause here. I'm gonna move to this shape. That whole idea of like singing out in your head, you'll hear different guitar players talking about like, well, I'm trying to sing this in my head and figure out where I'm going based on what I think should be a good next move. This helps you get better at that because you're staying, confined to a certain context, to a certain framework. So, okay, I'm just using this target note. Great, that's gonna keep me focused on what I can do around that and how I can lead into that target note. Once you get really good, all right, I'm gonna go from A into C, into D, back to A, and then G. And you're continuously giving yourself something to focus on as opposed to, I just know how to move around these few shapes, so. And that's why you make mistakes, because where should I pause? Where should I go next? And that's an important skill to build. All right, and it takes some time. So similarly, staying within a shape, so maybe you go from that, what I'm calling the Buddy Guy box, and you move it up to the B.B. King box. And you go through those two, and now there's a little bit more variety. And then you say, you know what, I'm gonna go between the D string and the B string, and I'll stay in that main shape. And then you'll move up to the Buddy Guy box, and then you'll move to the BB King box. And you can make it a little more fluid once you've had some practice staying in one spot for maybe the full 5 minutes, all right? And that's where you can make this an extended session and say, screw it, I've got an hour to play guitar, I'm just gonna freaking noodle now that I know how to be a little more intentional about it. And I'll take 5 minutes to do this shape, I'll do 5 minutes to do this shape. And then all of a sudden you're kind of inside of that one session, figuring out how to potentially be more fluid. In the last 5 minutes, maybe you move through all of them, all right? But it's a great way to give yourself a framework to stay inside of, to enhance creativity as opposed to, dull your creativity. All right, so there's 1 and 2. I think pretty simple stuff. It takes time, but I think the concepts themselves are pretty simple. Now, this is going to be based on what you already know. I know I linked some videos already. I'll put them in the description as well. Usually I'll give you a PDF, a free companion that you can use to kind of use these concepts on your own. It'll help you use the lessons, so you don't have to keep coming back to these videos. I don't have that today because this is going to be based on what you already know on the guitar, but I'm just letting you know that they're usually down there. And I do really like to, make sure that these stay free and accessible for everyone. Just use YouTube, let everyone have at it and get as much information out there as possible to make you all really good guitar players. So in the effort to, continue making these free, I have a Buy Me a Coffee link in the description. I started doing this, and it's a great way to support the endeavor of making this free long-term, zero pressure. But if you do want to support the channel in that way, you can use that link. And of course, liking and subscribing is helpful as well, all right? Concept 3, to just move this along, I appreciate you all hearing the plugs, would be choosing a specific technique, all right? So we've figured out, a target note, a little, area to kind of hang out in, and now we'll use a specific technique, and you can kind of use those first 2 concepts to inform this. But same thing, if I'm just in that pentatonic and maybe I'll use that little extension, I can say, all right, I'm just gonna focus on sliding. Doesn't mean some other techniques might not, fall in there, but the big focus would be sliding. And same thing, you might not do this with a backing track yet. You might not want that pressure. Just play around with, experimenting with sliding. And if you're finding your technique, isn't perfect, all the more reason to slow down and say, oh, you know what? I'm not great at like flying all over the neck. Let me just... just stay to that same area and kind of take that one phrase and, create some small adjustments inside of it so that it stays fresh, but you're also able to work on the technique itself. So same thing, hammers and pulls. Bends. Right? Raking. Yada, yada, yada. I do have, to keep plugging my own stuff, I have a video on, lead guitar technique. So if you're newer to guitar, you want to get those under your fingers, here's a great lesson on what those are and how you can practice them and refine them. But that's really the deal. 3 concepts. If you want to make this an efficient warm-up, right, you can just go 5 minutes per concept. And there you go. You got 15 minutes. You're turning on your brain, you're turning on the fingers. I might do something to warm up, for 5 minutes before this, just to make sure, fingers are synced up with, fretting hand synced up with picking hand, things like that. But you can use this as a warm up and it can just be a piece of your session. And then you can move into all the songs and solos you want to learn, or put it on the back end of your session. You played around with, you're a Jimmy Page person. So you're playing around with some of his songs, some of Led Zeppelin songs, some of his solos. And now you're going to try to play around with some of those licks and phrases in your own, creative pursuit. And that would be an interesting way to play around with this as well, all right? But lots of ways to do this. I'm gonna leave it there. I hope it was helpful to you all. Like and subscribe, helpful for me. And I will see you all in the next one, all right? Peace.